And we're recording.
Kablamo!
Howdy, my dudes. It's just three nerds.
Or two nerds.
Well, yes, it's just the two of us. It's me, Josh.
And me, Phil.
And,
Not Lau.
yeah,
Lau's not here.
Lau isn't here.
We don't speak of Lau.
Well, yes, this is just a podcasty thing on the Bad Batch, just to sort of, for us to talk about it, for you to talk about it, hopefully, in the comments, create a discussion, just so we can talk about our hopes and dreams of the show going into it, and then hopefully weekly as the episodes come out, our sort of thoughts on the episodes as they come out. Really, it's more of a relaxed, more podcasty style thing. There's going to be some below average Star Wars Battlefront 2 gameplay coming up, just for you to
Oh, boy.
mind-numbingly watch through. Yeah, I hadn't played in a while, and it shows. It really shows. Not only that, there'll be some footage from the episodes and stuff as they come out, but obviously that sort of stuff's limited right now, so we're just stuck with promotional material.
And the trailer itself, which is the thing that we're going to be discussing. Speaking of which, we're discussing the trailer, so maybe watch that before you continue any further.
Yep, links will be in the description. There's two trailers out at the moment, both very, very similar, so feel free to just watch one, but both links will be there. So yeah, just getting into it. Phil, what is the Bad Batch about?
Well, Josh, Bad Batch is an offshoot series from the now concluded Clone Wars series that finished its 7th season on Disney Plus late last year. And it's focusing on a group of clones, an experimental group of clones with desirable mutations called Clone Force 99, or the Bad Batch. And sort of their escapades post Revenge of the Sith. So Order 66 has been declared, the Jedi have started and to an extent been culled by the Empire. And it's, as I've said, the Empire is now beginning. The Republic is no more. Palpatine is in full control. He is no longer just the Senate. He is everything.
Yes, I think it's going to be quite interesting as well, because this is the first sort of on-screen canon seeing of, not that there's been any on-screen off-canon, but it's the first on-screen canon showing of immediate post Order 66.
Yes, it's the closest we've been to. It's the closest we've been to the immediate events following Revenge of the Sith and the prequel trilogy. Rebels, takes place much later, and Rogue One obviously happens in the immediate events prior to.
Yeah, I think Jedi Fallen Order, I think, is the closest thing alongside Rebels. It's like 2 years later, so it's when the clones, at least, while there still might be clones within the Stormtrooper force, they've had their armor change, whereas this is still so fresh that even the Stormtroopers themselves are still wearing clone armor.
Yeah.
And I think the main sort of storyline, at least from what's been shown, is that the Task Force 99, Clone Force 99, whatever, they're on the run from the Empire, being hunted down by the clones which turned in Order 66, because they didn't have inhibitor chips, because these desirable traits also made them slightly more aggressive and slightly more unorthodox in the way that they like to work, and so by inhibiting that, they were sort of limiting their experimental potential. So
and the opening clip of the trailer shows them in the original Camino clone training facility that we saw in the early seasons of the Clone Wars, watching Domino Squad go through that. And so you see them, initially being tested and being watched by Tarkin, Grand Moff Tarkin, or probably at this state, Admiral Tarkin. As it seems to be taking place, this would be, they wouldn't be being put through their paces further on to the point where we've seen them already in Clone Wars. This is likely, we're going to see a slight origin of where they've come from.
Yeah, I imagine that at least there may be flashbacks to life before Order 66 in this series. It won't just be entirely focused on what's ahead, purely on the basis of they're new characters. At the end of the day, we've only seen these people for, four episodes now.
4 episodes, yeah.
So it's yeah, we really need to get to grips with who they are and what they're about, both in the present day, but also where they've come from, because that's how you build a good story, for the most part, is knowing where they've been. And Dave Filoni is great at that, so I have no doubt that's going to be shown at some point.
Yeah, and especially with the fact that this is, you know, with the Clone Wars being over, and this being a brand new series, it's got to really prove in its first series that it can work as a standalone series.
Yes.
I've said series like 5 times now, but but it's true. Like there's you know sure they have the benefit of already being an established character base and you know having that history, but it's important that you know you're not having to rely on the Clone Wars to watch this, because while you know people will definitely gain from you know and have that sort of interest in being in having that callback from the Clone Wars, there are people who may not want to you know sit through all 7 seasons of the Clone Wars and just come in completely fresh.
Well, yeah, and I think that's why it helps that they've gone for a far more, as we've been discussing before, some form of like archetypal character base for these mutated clones, and then they've also brought forward an old clone, Echo, from the Clone Wars. So you've sort of got a reward for those that have seen Echo's journey through the Clone Wars, but then you've also got these really easy to follow, quite accessible characters coming through for this new series, so anyone can really hop along and join in. You don't have to have seen the whole thing prior. And yeah, and then they've also bringing in this new character, Omega, I believe is their name. Don't know whether they're male, female, other, who knows. But they seem to be of some sort of clone origin. They've got the New Zealand accent.
Yeah.
And they, to a degree, look like the sort of young clones. They've at least used the same face model. So it'll be interesting to see what that character plays into it, because
yeah, and how much weight they actually carry, because obviously you know with the clones being you know the actual Bad Batch being the main you know driving force, you sort of question how much impact a child essentially has in this sort of circumstance. You know, look to the Mandalorian, you saw how much an impact a child had there, and you know basically being the entire plot. You'd sort of imagine that a similar sort of circumstance is going to occur here. This child is going to have some sort of weight, and you know, be of some import to the Empire. Is the first you know sort of route that you'd think to explore, because obviously there's this whole idea of you know the Bad Batch, you know they're being hunted down by the Empire. But it's not like they have any like important secrets that are going to stop their reign of terror or anything this early on.
Well, no. I mean, we know the story, due to it being in the middle of the sort of prequel and original trilogies. Like you know how it plays out, so they can't have made that necessarily big of a dent. But could this Omega child be, I don't know, some sort of secret weapon, or equally could it be the complete opposite? Could this Omega child actually be used against them, and they're trying to stop that, much like the child in The Mandalorian or Grogu. As if you haven't seen that, sorry, spoilers. But
yeah, there's spoilers for this whole thing.
Yeah, we're gonna assume that you're well acquainted with the Star Warsness, the Star Wars lore, and if you're not, that's okay. But if you're not that filled in at this point after everything's been out for so long, I feel like you're probably not that worried anyway. But spoiler warning will be up at the start. But yeah, it would just be interesting to see what they do with that and how that sort of changes where things go. And then you've got like reoccurring characters like Rex. Rex has been shown in the trailers to be coming back, and so that's going to be an interesting callback to see how they incorporate him.
And how much they're actually willing to incorporate it,
yeah.
Because, as I said, this is it's a standalone series, and these callbacks are going to be useful. They're going to show that there is depth and breadth to their history, but equally, you can't lean on the success of another franchise entirely.
Exactly, and with Rex being so prominent in the Clone Wars, I don't think they'd want to feature him so much that it then just becomes almost like the Rex Show Part 2.
Exactly. They want the focus to be the Bad Batch, and if you include too much of Rex, people are going to naturally, and because he's a very well written character, they're going to want more of Rex, and when they inevitably phase him out of the episodes, there's likely going to be an uproar from the people saying we want more Rex, we want a Rex show, and that will take away from the overall potential success that the Bad Batch series will have.
Which, I mean, yeah, ideally, what I'd like to see being done with Rex is have him be a sort of go-to every now and then helpful character that they call upon episodes every now and then. They might come back to him and he's just featured to help them out with something. He's like the guy who's in the know. He might know a bit more, or equally the other way around. They sort of help each other out for those like individual episodes. But then ultimately he's left to his own devices to go do whatever.
Yeah, I wouldn't even say that it's a sort of back and forth sort of thing. I'd expect him to be someone that they stumble upon in a specific location, and then he helps them out for an episode or two. Fills out a minor arc.
Yeah.
And then moves on. I don't think he's going to be a constant point of reference. As much as it makes sense to have these old characters that they have existing relationships with, to call back on them and to lean on them for support. As much as it makes sense, it's not likely that they'll go in that direction. I think and it was established in season 7 of the Clone Wars. These are a small division of clones that work well together. They don't need a lot of support. They work best as a unit.
Yeah, and I mean, alternatively, the other way I was going to say I could see it going is potentially more like the sort of Ahsoka appearance in The Mandalorian, where she showed up for the episode, they did their thing, and now she's got what I believe to be at least a single series offshoot.
Yeah. Just
sort of tidying up Ahsoka's story arc. And I'd quite like to see that with Rex. Potentially he shows up and then he might get six episodes, or even just like one large episode a bit further down the line, just sort of, I guess, bridging the gap between the end of the Clone Wars, where we've seen him crash land with Ahsoka, and then where he eventually shows up in Rebels, and sort of seeing that, I don't know, some sort of linkage between the two, just to fill in the gap, because who knows what he's doing in there.
Yeah.
I mean, it might be known. I'm going to confess I haven't actually seen a lot of Rebels. I've seen enough to know the vague story arc of what goes on, but I don't know the ins and outs. So maybe that is explained, but it would be interesting, even if it is explained, to see that happen and to sort of see the more detailed parts of his journey, because I feel like there's a big gap there, and it needs to be fleshed out a bit more.
Absolutely. I've no doubt that at some point Disney will say, hey Dave, you know that character that you made? He's quite popular. I think we could milk a bit more money out of him.
Oh, if there's anything Disney like more, it's like milking for sequels.
Oh, but hey, I'm not complaining. More content.
I mean, yeah, especially if it's Dave Filoni headed, I'm not complaining there. Or Jon Favreau, I'll take it. Even the sequels, I don't think were as bad as people give them stick for. There's potential there, provided there's a.
They have their flaws, but in the extended universe, there's room for improvement. I mean, that's one of the inherent flaws of movies as a whole. You have this pushing it 3-hour moment where you've got to basically implant an entire narrative, and it means that you have to cut back on the detail, you have to cut back on motivations, you have to cut back on character development, which is it can be suicidal for a series to do that, because if you don't have likable characters, then your plot needs to be amazing, as shown by Rogue One. Rogue One, 100%. You can't really. I mean, if I ask you now to name the main character, could you do it?
Yes, Jyn Erso.
See, this is the problem doing it with people who actually know Star Wars. But generally speaking, the characters weren't very memorable. But it was the actions that they did, which was what made Rogue One such a big success.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that the Bad Batch will do, and I'm hoping that the sequel trilogy get this treatment, as whereas the prequel trilogy have had. They weren't well received to begin with. They've now sort of got this sort of cult following, meme following behind them. But that has definitely, I think, been aided by the fact that there's been so much more content built around that, largely due to the Clone Wars fleshing out so many more of the characters featured in that. And I feel like the rest of the other two trilogies, almost, especially the sequels, but even the gap between the prequel and the original trilogy, need this sort of fleshing out of a series just to give all those characters a bit of life and a bit more depth. Because even what Rogue One did for A New Hope, if you watch Rogue One and then go straight into A New Hope, it adds so much more context and depth to it, which wasn't there beforehand. It didn't necessarily need it, because the original trilogy is actually really good.
Yeah.
But that being said, doesn't mean it can't help. And especially with this gap in between, where there's like, what, a 20-odd year gap in between, it fills in holes and makes the world feel so much more alive.
Exactly, and that's one of the one of the main struggles that the sequel trilogy had, is that while obviously there was plenty of material out there in comics and stuff like that they could have used in terms of reference, they were creating stuff brand new. They only had they didn't have an end point, which is where a lot of the flaws came.
Yeah, a lot of the flaws came from not starting with the end point and working towards it.
Yeah, but that's why the prequels and all this content like the Bad Batch and the Clone Wars, and Rebels, and all these things, because you get to see, because if you're watching this, chances are you've watched the original trilogy. Chances are you've watched the prequels and even the sequels. So you have these these 9 staples that you can always think back to. So regardless of whether you've watched all of the Clone Wars and you come in watching Bad Batch and then something happens that is immediately referential to the main series of films,
yes,
that's going to evoke imagery in you, and you're going to feel rewarded for having that knowledge.
Exactly.
That is the beauty and the real strength of having long form series where you can explore these characters and you can explore these stories that will either influence things in the long term or just self-referentially work in terms of pre-existing content.
Which, I mean, yeah, and in talking of exploring characters across like a whole series, Echo is the only reoccurring character, really, with the exception of people like Rex. He's the only main character of this who has this entire 7 series backstory to him, and I feel that's going to be interesting as to how much they focus on that, whether they lean on him too much, potentially, to keep the old fans with it, or the fans of the Clone Wars with it, or whether they're going to actually shy away from that a bit, because Echo still has a lot of story to be explored. There's still a lot unknown about what happened to Echo. You know roughly what happened to him with his tubes and the experiments that were going on, but you don't. They weren't able to fill that out in those 4 episodes. You couldn't fill that out, so there's still plenty to be explored with the character of Echo. But at the same time, there's these new characters, and how they're going to, because they're bound to navigate it at some point, but how they're going to sort of entwine this old character with all this sort of past coming up with him, with these fresh people as well, is going to be really interesting, I think.
Absolutely. And there's also the idea that as you said, he has all this history and backstory, but the characters that he's now with and the characters of the Bad Batch, they are extremes of characters.
Yes.
Their mutations make them, to an extent, caricatures. You've got an extremely intelligent person, an extremely
strong dumb person.
Strong dumb. You've got extremely precise person, and then you've got the humanizing character of Hunter. That like
yes.
And with that extent, you've got Echo, who is this other humanizing character, and so you have these caricatures, and while you've had those 4 episodes to get to know them, you've known them in the Clone Wars. That is. You've known them as their caricatures. You haven't got a depth to look into or anything, and they kept it like that for a reason, because they were only there for 4 episodes. You keep them at their most basic, so that a brand new audience member can come in and understand what their purpose and intentions are. just for those 4 episodes, and then they can leave it. When you have a longer series like The Bad Batch, you can expect them to go, a lot heavier in terms of what their actual personalities are like, past just what their exaggerated characteristics are.
Exactly, and I wouldn't put it past them to do something in the lines of what a lot of soaps do. For instance, just going to use EastEnders. If you don't know what EastEnders is,
neither do we.
Yeah, neither do we really. We've only seen the odd bits here and there. But if you're not from the UK, Google EastEnders. I'm sure you'll get an idea of what it is. But it's a soap opera, and the one thing that they do really well, they don't do much well, but one thing is they have these archetypal characters, but then they take them on a journey and actually sort of flesh them out to be slightly more than just a caricature. And I think that's going to be really interesting, especially for the more extreme characters on the team, whether they're going to remain this just extreme, relatable, easily accessible character, or whether they're going to actually give them a bit more depth and a bit more insight.
Because with soap operas, you have, they have the chance to explore them in more depth, but generally they just, they stick to the age-old formula of show them at their most polarizing.
Yes.
So if you have a hard man, you see him at his most aggressive, and you see him at his most sensitive. You don't really see the stuff in between that. And so, that's what we got in those 4 episodes of The Bad Batch with all of the characters. You saw their polar extremes. The Bad Batch as a series is Dave Filoni's chance, and Disney as a whole, to not just treat them as extremes, but to go into the depth of that. And they're probably going to start off by looking towards Hunter, who is the sort of the de facto leader of the Bad Batch, and looking towards Echo.
Yes.
2 characters who instantly have this approachable, humanizing element to them that they come across as, compared to the rest of the group, your most average person.
I was going to say, I think that's Hunter's. While Hunter, yes, okay, he's good at tracking this, that, and the other, I think Hunter's key mutation, as it were, is actually being the most human out of the lot of them, and that includes all of the clones. The clones are very much bred to be just soldier, follow orders. Good soldier follows orders. Whereas Hunter is very much slightly more independently thinking, rational, and also has a bit more of that emotional flow as well, which may get in the way of following orders, which even to an extent a character like Echo won't necessarily have, because he is still, at the end of the day, while a cyborg, a clone. Like a true clone.
But it's one of those things that was explored in the Clone Wars as a series. The idea that clones, they basically started out in their depiction like droids.
Yeah.
They were a manufactured army built for this express purpose, and that's all they were needed for. But over the course of the Clone Wars series, you saw them actually, come to grips with the morality of things, and how, it was really, worth exploring this sort of content, as to, that the fact that they're actual living beings, they have thoughts, they can be given orders, but they're more than just machines.
Yeah, and I think that's ultimately what made them special compared to the droids, is that they could, while they were outnumbered, they could think. And these guys can think so much more without their inhibitor chips.
Exactly. They didn't have to deal with that initial programming. They were instantly rebellious to an extent. They had their own idea of how they can operate and how they can best work as a unit, and they just stuck to that because they knew they could be effective that way. As clones, they have that, inherent idea of serving the Republic and this idea, because that's their home, that's their family, that's they have that. Loyalty is something that is, built into every sort of clone, and just from the get-go. So they have that part of them, but they have the freedom that it took, 3-4 seasons of the Clone Wars to act for people like Rex, like Echo, to actually find that basis and that, grounded, more, human side to things.
And I quite like that, going slightly off topic here, but with that development, if you look at, say, Commander Cody, and Rex. Rex got that chance to develop and become more than just a clone. Whereas if you look at Cody, as good of a soldier he was, very much just by the book, here we are, doing what we're supposed to. And you can see that contrast more and more as the series goes on. And I imagine this, in turn, will also have that very even larger step, seeing them do even more outrageous things compared to what you'd normally expect clones to do. For instance, like, even if it's as far as disobeying orders, not that they have anyone to exactly answer to, because the only people they would have answered to are the ones trying to kill them. But yeah, that's just gonna be interesting. And aside from that, another new character coming back. Well, I say new. They're old in the timeline, new in the relation of coming here, is Fennec Shand from The Mandalorian. I'm not sure whether they showed up in Rebels. Part of me feels like they did, but then I'm doubting myself on that. But it'll be interesting to see, just again, her character have far more fleshing out, because at the end of the day, in Star Wars, apart from showing up in The Mandalorian, is set to be showing up in the Book of Boba Fett.
Yeah.
But apart from that, we don't really know much about her. Like, she's been in, what I'd say overall maybe 4 or 5 episodes overall, and that's it. And the focus wasn't even she was an assistant and a side helper.
We basically just know her as generic assassin lady.
Exactly.
Like a fucking badass one at that. But that's all we have to her character, really. She's a professional. She gets the job done. She can do it well. If you know. And there's every chance that in this show she may be treated as just that. She is just a generic assassin lady. But from from how much she featured in the trailer as a whole.
In the trailer, she featured, I think, twice in quite key voice moments as well, and more so than Rex. So I feel like if anything, potentially maybe the Batch would come across her, and they'd help each other, because I believe the Batch are going to be taking more of a sort of mercenary sort of look at things, almost like the Mandalorian, in the way that I'm guessing they're going to be on the run. They're going to be potentially protecting this child. Sounds very familiar. But they're going to need help. They're going to make enemies. They've also got this overarching story of the Imperials coming after them. And so it'll be interesting to see where Fennec sort of fits in with that overall story. Yeah, I'm not sure whether I can.
Well, the only other character that we've yet to mention that appeared in the trailer is Saw Gerrera.
Oh yes, Saw Gerrera. Yeah, he's not mentioned actually in the trailer. He's not even featured.
No, he is.
Oh, is he?
Yeah, he appears in the trailer.
I didn't even notice.
And actually has speaking lines in it.
Oh wow! I need to go watch it again.
Yeah, but no. So for those who don't know, Saw Gerrera featured in the Clone Wars, in one of in an arc in the Clone Wars, but is also featured in Rebels, I believe.
And Rogue One.
And Rogue One.
And Jedi Fallen Order.
Yeah, so like a very on and off character that is like interspersed between the timeline that we have of Star Wars. That we get essences of his character and his like overarching story as a whole. But again, we haven't got to see this sort of in-depth characterization and personalization as much.
Yeah, I always find characters like this quite interesting, more on the fact that you never pardon, it's almost quite interesting never following a character all the way through, but instead seeing them at one particular moment, whether it be a high or a low, and then seeing a gap where they've obviously gone off, done something else, and then they come back different or the same, and it's seeing how they change between these different interactions and watching them develop in that way. And for Saw Gerrera, who's not necessarily a main protagonist of this or of any Star Wars content as of yet, I mean, I'd personally really like to see a series based around him, but maybe that's just me. But it's quite interesting just seeing that development, because it's made so much more clear when there's gaps in the story. And yeah, if you haven't played it, during the sort of Imperial occupation of Kashyyyk, Saw Gerrera is there, and that's only in 2 years after. So it'd be interesting to see whether Saw Gerrera is actually featured on Kashyyyk, or whether he's off doing other things. In which case, who knows? We might get more fleshing out of the galaxy that we do know, as well as the galaxy that we don't. But yeah, I think. Don't know about you. I've exhausted my my words.
That pretty much covers most of it. I mean, it's a 2-minute trailer at the end of the day.
Yeah.
If we spoke much more, it would just be pure speculation and rambling, which is basically what this has been up until now.
I mean, that is the whole point. And if you do have any other thoughts, any other suggestions, any things that you think which we haven't mentioned, feel free to add it into the comments, because we'd love to hear it and discuss about it further, and we will be going forward into next week on Tuesday, the 4th of May, for the first episode. But yeah, if that's all we've got to say, that's all we've got to say, and we'll be seeing you after episode 1 for the next episode, and hopefully we'll have a bit more clarity on what's going on, because it's a 70-minute episode as opposed to the standard length ones. And there's two episodes next week, one on Tuesday and then Friday from then on out. So,
busy schedules ahead of us.
Yes, but stay tuned for that. I hope you've enjoyed. This has been Just 3 Nerds. If you like what you see, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And we'll see you in the next one.
Bye-bye.
Bye.